Good morning, Horizon Church. You all know my name, I think, so we'll go ahead and get moving. This is our second week in the book of Ruth, which is a short narrative book in the Old Testament. You might be wondering why we're taking time to teach from the Old Testament, right? If I were to ask you, what's your favorite verse? What's your favorite chapter? What's your favorite book of the Bible? I would venture to guess that most of you would produce a verse or chapter or book from the New Testament. Why are we taking time to teach out of the Old Testament? Well, one, we believe that the whole of the Bible is inspired by God, right? It's useful for teaching, rebuke, correcting, and training in righteousness to equip the man of God for every good work. You guys are familiar with this verse, and so we apply that not just to the New Testament, but to the scriptures Paul was actually referencing in that moment. The scriptures that they had available, the Old Testament. And then secondly, Jesus himself showed us the Old Testament's importance, right? You might recall this story. Jesus, he's walking, the risen Jesus, right? He's walking along the road with the two disciples, and they're on their way to Emmaus. And Jesus, he walks up beside these two disciples, and he says, "What are you guys doing?" And they don't recognize that it's Jesus. And they say, "We're talking about this guy. We were convinced." No, not only convinced, he showed himself to be a prophet. And we were convinced that he was the Redeemer of Israel. We were convinced that this was the one that God had sent. But it turns out they crucified him. Turns out he died. But we did just hear this report from some women. They went to the tomb and they were looking for his body. And they said that they saw an angel who said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" And it was at this point that it says Jesus began with Moses and the prophets to unveil or to show everything concerning him through the scriptures. And so in short, we preach from the Old Testament because it's inspired, because it's useful, and because it points us to Christ. Christ did this himself, about himself, in that instance. As we'll see today, Ruth 2 is no exception. It's inspired. It's useful. It points us to Jesus. Before we dive into Ruth 2, I have a question. What are you searching for? I'm not talking about your keys or your wallet, though if you have lost them, you're in good company. Just ask my wife. In fact, I've lost them so many times, I started to tell her, just tell me they're on the bookshelf, right? That's the zone where I drop stuff, but I never remember I dropped it, okay? What are you searching for on a deeper level, right? Are you looking for rest? Are you looking to wake up and just not be grumpy? Are you looking for help from the Lord when you wake up and you're grumpy anyway? What is it that you're searching for? What is it that you're hoping to find? Are you like Naomi in a season where you're empty and you're looking for fullness? Are you like Ruth and you're going out to find favor? What is it that you're searching for? If you are in fact seeking something, you're in good company in the story we'll read this morning. Let's begin by looking at the first couple of verses and see how they're searching. Okay. Still behind the plane, but I can see the TV. We're good. Verse 1 and 2. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, following one in whose eyes I may find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Here we see a new character come onto the story. His name was Boaz, meaning in him is strength, right? It's the first time he enters this narrative. And depending on what translation you have, you'll get a variety of descriptions about him. If you have the ESV, it'll say a worthy man. If you have the NASB, it'll say a man of great wealth. If you have the CSB, it'll take both of these ideas and say a prominent man of noble character, right? The words, they got a wide range of meaning, and so all of these are acceptable. There's no point in quibbling over which one it is because the story will bear out both are true. But we also get this detail that he is a relative of Elimelech. Now at this point we don't know, is it his brother, is it his uncle, is it his fifth cousin? But it's starting to paint a picture that there might be a seedling of hope. There's a guy who's related in some way. He has the means to do something and the character to do something about it. Perhaps they could find a source of help to enter into their predicament that we saw from last week. So it appears at this point, Ruth and Naomi, they still have their no food problem from last week. But Ruth sets out to do something about it. Right? She sets out to not only find food, but she's going out and she's looking for favor. She's hoping to find help, grace, someone who will their good. She asks her mother-in-law for permission, and Naomi grants it. Naomi, she's probably still feeling the bitterness, the emptiness of Ruth 1 as not much time has passed. She's searching for fullness, and though it appears she has been overcome by her circumstances, and her searching does not have the same initiative as Ruth, nonetheless, that's what she wants to find. So, they're both searching for something. They're searching for favor and fullness, but what is it they will find? This morning, I would like to argue that what they will find is refuge. Refuge under the wings of God. Now, what does it look like to find refuge under the wings of God? First, it looks like finding refuge in the providence of God. See Ruth 2, verse 3. So she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to that portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Right? She happened to find the field of the one relative that we know exists. She just so happened. As I was reading a commentary on this portion, it said there's the verb form of the word chance in this sentence, and there's the noun form of the word chance in this sentence. And so if we were going to give a real wooden translation, it would be something like she chanced upon chance itself into the field of Boaz. Right? How many times have you had a just so happens moment in your life? I do believe the author is, using some irony here, and it's not just so happened, but it's the sovereign hand of God guiding by providence. Providence, which is God exercising his sovereignty for good, holy, and wise ends. He could exercise it for any ends, but he's exercising it for good. Right? How many of you have had a just so happens moment where after the clock has ticked a few more times down the road, you see that it was actually God's hand, right? It just so happens that I went to Fort Hays State, and I was looking for rides outside of McMidas Hall, and there was a girl there who was giving rides, and she didn't own a car, but she was borrowing one. Her name is Scout, right? It just so happens that I went to Fort Hays State and was discipled by a guy named Travis Bossy, right? It just so happens that I went to a church that was intent on developing young leaders and planting churches. It just so happens that the only house we could afford that came on the market in Baldwin met all of our needs and a lot of our wants. It just so happens that we got able-bodied people to join the church plant and help set up and tear down right away. It just so happens we got put in connection with sound equipment and somebody who knew how to set it up. It just so happens. Refuge Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant in charge of the reapers replied, "She is the young Moabite woman whom different. It reflected well upon Boaz's leadership, and he noticed right away, right? He, like David, knew the condition of his flocks. He noticed right away when there was a young woman there who he had not seen before, right? It turns out that she happened to be a relative of Naomi. The report, it showed Ruth to be courteous, to be humble, to be a diligent person. She asked permission for something that was her right in Leviticus 19:9, right? When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the edges of your field. You shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest. Verse 10 says, you shall leave them for the needy and the stranger. Now, if I had to describe Ruth in this situation, I think needy and stranger would both be appropriate. And nevertheless, she asked in humility. She wasn't just humble, she was diligent. She worked hard since the morning and only took a small break. It seems she had prospered in the godly workplace thus far. So Ruth, she was searching for favor, but she found refuge in a godly workplace. Right? How many of us find it refreshing when we see other Christians being Christian in public? When we see other Christians being Christian in the workplace? Jesse, who has led worship for us a couple of times up here, just recently told me the story where he went and saw his doctor, and at the end of his appointment, his doctor just said, and now I would like to pray for you. Right? And he said, I find that both spiritual and physical health are important and often connected. Right? Jesse was incredibly blessed by that, and it brought wind to my sails as well to see Christians being Christians in the workplace. Earlier this week, my mom was walking through Menards, and when her nerves flare up, her right leg stops working, and she was dragging the right foot as she's pushing the cart. A woman comes up to her, I would like your first name. I'd like to add you to my prayer list. My mom just starts crying. I'm a Christian too. Like, thank you so much. This is great encouragement. And they just parted and said, I'll see you in heaven, And it's so refreshing when Christians are Christians out there in the real world. And she went out searching for favor, and she found refuge not only in the providence of God and in the godly workplace, but as we'll see, she finds refuge in the field, provision, and protection of a righteous relative. See verses 8 and verse 9. Then Boaz said, water. Do not glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go from this one, but join my young women here. Keep your eyes on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have ordered the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. Right, Boaz, he addresses her with kindness, my daughter, and he tells her 3 times not to go, but stay. Don't go, stay. Right? You won't be here alone. Here you won't have to wonder and look over your shoulder to see if anything's going to happen. Here you will be safe. Your protection, it's been ordered. Your provisions, they've been made sure. You can glean here. You can get drinks of water whenever you want. In this field, you will be taken care of. So even though Boaz has been exercising this godly influence that we've seen, he still ensures her protection and the protection of other women under his care. It wasn't just Ruth that he took responsibility for Ruth gleaned with other women. He told her to join the group. His generosity, it's incredibly great when seen against the backdrop of the day. Foreigners had been made to carry water in the history of Israel. You may recall that the Gibeonites were forced to cut wood and carry water as a result of lying their way into a treaty with the Israelites. They said, we're from far away. Make peace with us, make peace. And meanwhile, they were actually the Israelites' neighbors. And so the Israelites made them to carry water. Here, not the foreigner getting water for the native, but the native for the foreigner. Right, this would have taken his servants carrying supply of water from the source out to the field. This would have taken him paying laborers to do work that would benefit her. Ruth, she went out looking for favor, but she found refuge in the field, the provision and the protection of a righteous relative. She also found refuge in being noticed. See verse 10. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" She finally found what she had set out for, right? Why have I found favor in your sight? She was so grateful, she bows to the ground. And this favor that she found, it came in something simple. It came above and beyond the requirements of the law. I can't help but hear Jesus' powerful question in Luke 7. Do you see this woman? Right? The Pharisees invited Jesus over to his house. And this woman gets word that this is where Jesus is, and she comes in and she starts weeping upon his feet. And she starts washing his hair with her tears and her hair. And she starts kissing his feet. And Jesus just says, the Pharisees like, man, the Pharisees, they're whispering over here, like, if Jesus just knew who this woman was, he would not let her touch him. Like, there's no way that Jesus would let her touch him if he knew. Obviously, he's not a prophet. He doesn't know what kind of woman this is. And he just asks a very powerful question. Do you see this woman? I came, and you did not wash my feet. She washed my feet. I came. You didn't greet me with a kiss. She hasn't stopped kissing my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil. She has anointed my feet with tears. Right? She doesn't. The mention of Boaz in the scriptures. Matthew 1:5, it's the genealogy of Jesus. Boaz's mom and her family that lived in Israel. He had likely seen examples of his mom being both treated well, she's a hero, or if they didn't know her, being treated poorly, she's the outsider. It just so happens that Boaz's eye had been trained to notice those who don't get noticed. In the providence of God, Boaz grew up in an outsider's house. When Ruth sought favor, she went out seeking favor, and she found it in the noticing eye of him not only seeing this woman, but doing something about it. She had found refuge in providence. She had found refuge in a godly workplace, in the care of a righteous relative, and being noticed, but ultimately she found refuge in the wings of God. See verses 11 through 13. Now Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work, and may your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your sight, my Lord. For you have comforted me, and indeed have spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not like one of your female servants. So Boaz, he goes, I've heard your story, right? I've heard your testimony, how you turned from the false God. Hide under his wings. Hide. Hide in Christ, and no condemnation will find you. Hide. Hide under Christ, and no wrath will find you. No guilt, no shame will stick. Won't you do it? Won't you put your whole life and hide in him? My prayer is that you'll leave the blizzard, leave the winter storm of sin and death and hell and Satan, and run to the warm refuge that is Christ. Run to the refuge of his wings. He forgives the sin. He overcomes death. He spares from hell. He grants heaven. His gift is the Spirit, which is stronger than Satan. So hide. Hide under the wings of God. It was there under the wings of God which Ruth found favor that was full, and the refuge of comfort and kindness in speech of Boaz. Have you ever been given kind words? Right? It says that the words were spoken to her heart. It was an encouraging word. We know that the Proverbs tell us the tongue, it has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. And so, part of the multifaceted refuge of God is the kind speech of others. It's the encouraging word that can bring life to your soul. She sought favor, and she found refuge not only in the kind speech of another, but in the generosity, the abundant generosity of another. See verses 14 through 17. Dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she sat and was satisfied and had some left. When she got up to glean, Boaz commanded his servants, saying, "Let her glean among the sheaves, and do not insult her. Also you are to purposely slip out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it so that she may..." Request from Boaz. Estimates were anywhere from 10 to 30 liters, so let's go with 20, right? Middle of the road. So a normal day's estimate of food during that time was 1 liter of grain. So she likely gathered more than a week's worth of grain for her and Naomi in a single day. She sought favor, and she found refuge in the abundant generosity of another. At 1 a.m. Fun times, right? Scout answered her phone at 1 a.m., thank you, and came and got me, but that still left the car with 2 popped tires. A lovely couple heard about it, and they paid for my tires without even being asked. They didn't have to do it. They didn't need to do it. But it was a refuge for me in the abundant generosity of another. Perhaps you have found yourself on the giving side of such an equation. I'm sure you have learned to believe God when he says that it's more blessed to give than receive. She sought favor, and she found refuge not only in generosity, but in the kindness of the Lord. So, mother-in-law then said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness from the living and from the dead." Again, Naomi said to her, "This man is our relative." Not just any relative, one of our redeemers. Right? I pictured like Buddy the Elf going like, "Oh my gosh, I know him." Right? This is not just any relative, it's a close one. And so while we found out he was some way connected, now we find out it's a close connection. But before we get there, Ruth, she takes all of her gleanings and her leftovers home, and it brings great encouragement to Naomi. Right? Last week, you remember I said, no king and no food and no husband and no sons and no hope, really no anything. Well, it kind of appears the tables are starting to turn. There's no longer no food. There's food. There's no longer no hope, right? Blessed of the Lord. She's just ecstatic about what has happened today, and she sees the kindness of the Lord in it. Now, commentators went back and forth. This is Boaz. This is the Lord. Whose kindness is it referring to? If you look up different translations, again, they go back and forth. I think the language was ambiguous on purpose because it was the kindness of the Lord and the kindness of Boaz that was demonstrated to Ruth and therefore to Naomi. And this brings up a point which I think is true across time. The church will often be the vehicle through which God's love flows here on earth. This apparently meant a great deal to Naomi. She categorized herself as among the living, right? This seems to be an uptick from last week. I'm empty, I'm bitter. But these words, they brought life to her emptiness once again. Why? Well, Boaz, he's not just a clansman, he's one of the redeemers. He's a closer relative with more obligation. A redeemer had 4 jobs in the Old Testament. If a person was poor and had to sell their land, the redeemer would buy it back. If a person was poor enough, they also sold themselves. A redeemer would buy them back. He would pay their debt and deliver them from slavery. If a person died, without having offspring, as in the case of Elimelech. And typically a younger brother would marry the deceased widow, and their first offspring would be the legal son of the deceased. It was, if there was no brothers, then uncles or cousins or other relatives could do it, but they did not have to do it. And then fourthly, a person, if they were murdered, it was the job of the kinsman redeemer, who was also called the blood avenger, to seek justice on their behalf. So there's somebody who is a man of means, a man of character, and he's not just kind of related to us. He's related to us closely enough that he's our redeemer. So Boaz, he could redeem Elimelech's name from the grave if he married Naomi, but since Naomi was beyond the years of giving birth, Ruth could stand in as proxy. Elimelech's name, it was not gone yet. Naomi, she had the hope of sons once again. What kindness of the Lord she found refuge in. We'll look more at this Redeemer concept both during communion, but also next week. If a person was murdered, my eyes jumped. Lastly, this week, we are going to see that Ruth sought favor and found refuge in generosity across time. See verses 21 through 23. So then Ruth the Moabitess said, furthermore, he said to me, you are to stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law Ruth, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women so that others do not assault you in another field. So she stayed close by the young woman of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. So Boaz, he told Ruth to stay close until all the harvest was finished. She stayed indeed through the barley and the wheat harvests. This would have been about a 7-week period. From April to June, that would lead up to Pentecost. And so again, if we're taking that 20 liters that we were talking about earlier, and we took 7 weeks times 6 because they would have taken the Sabbath off, that's 42 days. So 42 times 20 is 840, but divided by 2 people, 420 days worth of food. So more than a year supply for these 2 women. This generosity was staggering. Like life-changing staggering. Like I don't have to wonder where my next meal is coming from. I got it for this year. Kind of staggering. So hope, it's on the rise. And yet the chapter ends with a sentence that indicates that hope had not yet fully materialized. It says she lived with her mother-in-law. Right? She wasn't married. And weeks had gone by. And there was still the question, would she get married? Would Boaz redeem them? The prospect was there, but would it materialize into a marriage, a son, into the redemption of their family line? Food was great. They were grateful.